Hello and welcome to H-Karts, coming to you from a budget studio inside a rented bedroom at a locally famous student accommodation in Huddersfield, because this is the second quarter of our retrospective on the 2018 BUKC season. Rounds 3 and 4 of the main championship and round 2 of the Rookies Championship took place at the very popular Whilton Mill circuit, and there were a few changes for the Huddersfield teams. The most significant one came from the B team, where Aaron Walsh was absent, either because of a Go-Karting injury shortly after Bookmore Park, or maybe because Jack Linus fed him a knuckled butty after taking his questionable advice of spinning during a race. Taking his place was Ryan Hayburn, who in fact wasn't out for race 1. That particular honour went to A team's Ollie Milner, who had a much better grid slot than in Bookmore, with 34th. At least he didn't have to deal with a saturated circuit, only a bit of moistness, but like Bookmore, he showed some very strong pace on a greasy surface and gained 10 places on the first lap alone. At one point, Milner executed an overtake on Yorkshire rivals Leeds A, and then tried to get the pusher cart's attention so he could tell them how good his overtake was. Overall, it was a clean race for the man with the golden Volvo as he finished 10th. The top 3 were Oxford Brookes A, Oxford Brookes C, and Southampton B. B team's Sam Turn was out for race 2, and after his solid performance at Bookmore Park, he was hopeful for another strong result, and of course more showing off. Just like at Bookmore, he was disappointed not to have much involvement in what was a very messy first lap, as he had started down in 20th. Just to run through some of the incidents, Cambridge A attempted a handbrake turn on the run-up to Christmas Corner and received 8s and 9s from the judges. Another driver spontaneously exploded before Inkermans, while Southampton B became the victim of a pit manoeuvre. Turn had made it into the outskirts of the top 10 in the first few laps behind a pretty hefty queue of karts, and in amongst the traffic he was pushed onto the grass by Warwick B. Having dropped from 12th to 18th, the turntable set off on a charge, which included this outrageous attempted overtake on Oxford Brookes D going into Christmas. He was so surprised by his dive bomb that he decided to do it properly going into Ashby. His charge was complete once he overtook Bath B for 9th just after half distance, and remained there until the end. Liverpool A, UWTSD Swansea and Oxford A were the top 3. Our Regenmeister, Stephen Letts, and B team's newcomer Ryan Hayburn were out for race 3, starting 18th and 28th on the grid. Letts had a flyer as he avoided the chaos and moved up to 10th by the end of the first lap, while Hayburn had a steadier and moved up 2 places. But Letts was absolutely flying, and by the end of lap 4 he had moved up to 3rd place, and within touching distance of 2nd. As the circuit dried out, however, Letts wasn't able to challenge Brunel A for the runner-up spot, and despite a cone penalty for Brunel A, Letts wasn't close enough to capitalise and had to settle for 3rd. But this became 4th after he picked up his own cone penalty on the very last lap. He lost out to Sheffield A by a massive 0.039 of a second. Hayburn's B-team debut was hardly noticed on the livestream, with this background shot being the best of his airtime during the race. He finished in 29th, while the top 3 were Northumbria A, Brunel A and Sheffield A. UWEA will probably win the Most Ambitiously Daft Helmet award. Race 4, and unlike his teammates before him, Luke Bath had a decent starting position up in 8th, 10 places ahead of Joseph Jakes. At the start, a couple of drivers found the tyre barriers more to their liking. Although none of them were our lot, it is important to mention that they were perfectly fine. Bath had a particularly good start and even challenged Birmingham A going into Inkermans, but Jakes was flying as well and got ahead going through Chapman's. He assumed 8th, while Bath dropped down to 11th. Shaky Jakes spent almost the entire race as if he was log-jammed on the M62 between junctions 26 and 27. He ran as high as 6th at one point, but he didn't have the car underneath him and struggled to hold off his rivals. He eventually finished 11th on the road, but he had kept it clean enough to avoid penalties and moved up to 9th once everyone else had their knuckles wrapped by JV. It was a similar story for Bath, as being embroiled in constant battling meant that he dropped to as low as 20th at one point, but the Bath bomb kept his head and fought back to eventually finish 14th. A good effort in a highly competitive field. The top 3 were Oxford Brookes B, Coventry B and Leeds A. The B team's final race of round 3 saw Jack Linus starting 15th, coincidentally the same position he finished in round 1. There was no repeat of his qualifier's mishap this time around, and in fact the first few corners were a hell of a lot cleaner than the previous races. Linus had a difficult first couple of laps in the congested part of the race and dropped down to 24th by the end of the second lap, but from there things got better for the racing Linus as he fought his way back up the order. He proved his speed by setting the fastest lap 10 minutes into the race, and he even had time for a spot of lawn mowing. His front bumper also briefly displayed a decoration in the form of a carrier bag, which disappeared once Sam Turn had finished writing down his shopping list. Linus finished 15th on the road, but was elevated to 9th post-race after many drivers kept making up their own circuit. The top three were Nottingham Trent A, Southampton A and Newcastle A. Just one more driver remained for the final race of round 3, Alex Gunn for the A team. He had a sensational qualifying session. The algorithm put him second on the grid. Was he confident of a good result?
Yeah, I don't mind starting from the front. Like I said, I'll just crack on and see what I can get done, get job done and stuff.
Obviously starting from the front will help the shotgun's cause. The start went by very cleanly with Gunn retaining second, although looking quite eager to take the lead off of Warwick A. Indeed, on the second lap, he took the lead going into Christmas Corner. So there you go, job done. Well, not really, because Manchester Metropolitan A fancied their chances, and on lap 5, they took the lead going into Chapman's. But then 2 laps later, Gunn took back what he felt was his going into Ashby. So there you go, job done. No, because the top 4 were still tightly locked together, and on lap 11, Nottingham A seized the initiative going into Ashby, followed by the plucky Manchester Metropolitan A. Gunn then briefly watched the top 2 having scraps with each other as this three-way battle raged on, but trying to take advantage of the dogfight then put Exeter A in the mix, and far from retaking the lead, Gunn lost another position. So there you go, all seemed lost. Gunn was not going to win. Far from it. With Oxford Brooks B bearing down on the leading quartet, Gunn retook 3rd from Manchester Metropolitan A at the end of the 14th lap, and then 2 laps later, Gunn actually took advantage of a battling duo and retook the lead of the race. More importantly for him, the battle for second really raged, which allowed the shotgun to edge away from the impending eruption. That bit of breathing space was crucial for him to bring his kart home to take Huddersfield's second win of 2018. It had been such a good race that the signal collapsed for a quick moment. Rounding out the top 3 were Exeter A and Nottingham A. You can just see JV on the right feeling not too pleased to see his karts being raced so hard by Bath B and Birmingham C. So, there you go, job actually done, which must have pleased Gunn.
Yeah, absolutely knackered. It was a hard race, that. Yeah, definitely. It was good though, I enjoyed it, but yeah.
So Huddersfield A took second overall for round 3, tied with Southampton A but ahead on countback, and just 1 point behind Oxford Brooks B, while Huddersfield B were 20th overall, but 3rd in intermediates, so they got a lovely little trophy as well. On to round 4, and both teams were out for the first Enduro, with Joseph Jakes starting 6th for the A team and Sam Turn at the other end of the grid in 31st. The start went well for both Huddersfield teams, unlike that of Swansea C, who were trying their hand at rallycross. By the start of the 3rd lap, Joseph Jakes was up to 3rd behind Leeds A and Northumbria A, and going into Christmas Corner, he got alongside Northumbria A and ended up taking the pair of them. So Shaky Jakes was the early leader, but as in Buckmore Park, the A team chose to pit early for fuel, and once the first round of stops were done, he resumed at the head of the field. Meanwhile, Turn had blitzed his way up the order and was running in 4th place after the first round of stops, and he wasn't done yet. First he did a bit of showing off, and then he moved up to 2nd just after half distance to make it a Huddersfield 1-2. Things were looking alright. Cue the second round of pit stops where both teams experienced slow stops due to traffic, and all of a sudden, things weren't looking alright. This dropped Ollie Milner down to 6th. He was battling hard against Loughborough A while at the same time driving a bucking Bronco. Linus lost even more time and dropped down to as low as 16th at one point, but he was fighting back, overtaking Southampton A for 13th. But bad pit stops were nothing compared to being collected by spinning back markers. Just slightly out of shot, Milner was unable to avoid Nottingham C, and far from challenging the likes of Loughborough A and Newcastle A for 4th, he was now a lap behind them. Another incident just a few laps later dropped Milner to 22nd come the end, while Linus finished 10th, a complete contrast to the situation at half distance. Just the B team were out for the second Enduro, with Luke Bath starting in the glorious position of 5th. A terrific start from the Bath bomb moved him up to 2nd after the first couple of corners, and he held that place for a few laps before Bristol A got ahead on the 5th lap. On the next lap, Bath pulled into the pits for a fuel stop, but it wasn't an especially quick one. Even so, the B team was still looking good for a decent finish. But then on lap 27, another disaster, as Bath spun at Ashby whilst challenging King's College A for 12th place. This dropped him down into a battle for 21st against UWE A and Brunel B. The second pit stop saw Bath hand over to Ryan Hayburn, but pit stops just didn't seem to be working out well for Huddersfield. And then a few laps later, Hayburn had a spin. Curiously, it was at the same corner as Bath's spin early in the race, so obviously the Bath bomb had been giving the needle some tips. The B team eventually finished in 25th place, and that was them done for the day. The last race of the day featured the A team and the race-winning combination of Stephen Letts and Alex Gunn, but they would have a challenging task on their hands from 30th on the grid. They somehow managed to lose places during the first lap due to Letts being caught up in another driver's incident. From there, Letts just lost his mind and went hell for leather, despite another less than ideal first stop. By the time the first pit window closed, Letts was deep in the top 10, but he was pushing his luck somewhat, picking up 2 penalties, one for an ABC and one because one of JV's cones looked at him funny. By the time the second pit window opened, Letts had just taken Brunel A for 4th, and then immediately came into the pits so his data could be reformatted and re-downloaded as Alex Gunn. It was a better stop that allowed Huddersfield A to remain ahead of Brunel A, but the shotgun was hungry for more bullets in his barrel, as he battled with Southampton A and Oxford Brooks B for 4th. On lap 47, he fired his first shot, and then completed the double-barrelled movement on the next lap. One more position was gained on the road thanks to a late pit stop from Imperial A, and Gunn also set the fastest lap on his way to a superb 3rd on the road, but thanks to his teammates' pesky penalties, this became 6th in the final classification. So that rather mixed set of results in round 4 left Huddersfield A 18th overall and Huddersfield B 28th, or 7th in the intermediates class. Knows where that put them in the championship standings. So on to the rookies, which featured 5 races, each containing at least 1 and in some cases 2 Huddersfield drivers. First up was C Team's John Brown starting 14th and D Team's Ben Tripp starting 34th. Despite losing 2 places at the start, Brown used his F1 stock car racing experience to great effect as he battled his way through the midfield to finish a solid 10th. Tripp also had a solid and error-free performance and finished 24th. The D team were out on their own for the next race with Liam Draper qualifying 24th, despite being involved in a pile-up at the boot. During the actual race, he experienced déjà vu, as a botched overtake going into Ashby resulted in the destruction of Cambridge B's wheel. The Cambridge B driver described his experience as really good fun, whereas Draper described his race as f***ed. 2 other incidents during the race left him down in 32nd. Race 3 saw 2 new faces in each team. For the C team, Ben Hinchliffe, and making his BUKC debut for the D team, James Brickles, who wanted to race at Buckmore but couldn't because of a dastardly on-the-day assignment for his degree. From 9th on the grid, Hinchliffe was competitive and was running up in 7th before receiving a slightly overcooked T-bone from Nottingham Trent B on the penultimate lap. He eventually finished 11th, beating Manchester Metropolitan B by an enormous 0.04 of a second. Meanwhile, from 21st on the grid, Brickles set himself just one target for the race: do not spin. He nearly failed when he came across 2 spun karts at the boot at half distance, but he had enough forward momentum to keep going. Throughout the race, he battled with the likes of Warwick C and Imperial B, and was even daring enough to dish up a bit of racing driver arrogance to one of the leaders. He's a long way off of Esteban Ocon in terms of drivers completely devoid of humility, and later Brickles realised that he looked a pillock. Nevertheless, he finished 14th, not a bad result for his BUKC debut. C Team's Jack Hodges and D Team's Danny Moore were next up for the penultimate race of the day. Hodges showed good speed at Buckmore, and he was once again competitive as from 6th on the grid, he moved up to 2nd behind Uni of Life A after the first couple of laps, and then utilised the notoriety of backmarkers to move into the lead on lap 8. He remained there until the end to take Huddersfield's first rookies win of the season. Meanwhile, Danny Moore did what he could from 30th on the grid, but he suffered a spin, also on the 8th lap, as if he felt the need to balance the equilibrium. He recovered from nearly last to finish 26th. One more driver was left, Gary F. Mangan, who had moved from the D to the C team for this race. Qualifying didn't exactly go to plan for the Liverpudlian lunger, but he had a flying start from 27th to be 19th by the end of the first lap. He even had a front row seat of Oxford B and UWEB's big collision at the final corner. But things went wrong on lap 2 as he got caught up in someone else's incident at Christmas Corner. As an act of impatience, Mangan tried to bump start the kart himself and almost succeeded, but reluctantly he had to admit defeat and wait for a pusher kart. He eventually finished 33rd, having received 2 track limits penalties and a few new admirers in the Huddersfield camp. So mostly thanks to Hodges winning race 4, the C team were a solid 5th overall behind Strathclyde A, Surrey A, Edinburgh A and Bath C, while the D team improved from 40th to 32nd, and that marks the halfway point of the 2018 retrospective. The third quarter will see the BUKC's first and so far only visit to Houghton Park, which will be broadcast on the 9th of March. H-Karts would like to thank all our sponsors, and stay tuned and see you soon.